Welcome to Overtime right here on WOTM. I'm Gerhard Mathangani, joined by Mark Everett Kelly. Good to be with you one more week. Thank you for spending some time with us today. It's a really interesting part of the year because before we get into the meat of football, football still is in the headlines, but it's really off the field stuff. We'll talk a lot about football, also talk some baseball as well, and then of course some big news out of the NFL today and some great competition going on for Alabama athletes over in Tokyo, Japan at the Olympic Games. We'll touch on that as well. But Mark, we talked about the football aspect of it. It kind of bled in from last week when the big news came out about Texas and Oklahoma looking to join the SEC. Today, it looks like both Texas and OU have made their first actual real move to make their leap into the SEC from the Big 12. And that move was they are not going to renew the rights, the media rights, with the Big 12. So all the media rights of the Big 12 was, most people know that's where the money is made. Oklahoma not pursuing further action with the Big 12, making room for the SEC. They sent out a joint statement today saying in part in that joint statement that they plan to renew, or they plan to kind of be with the agreement that currently holds, and that goes through 2025. But they've left some wiggle room out there where they don't have to stay in the conference until that time in 2025. What are some of your thoughts about this, as it kind of seems that we're getting closer and closer to the Sooners and the Longhorns joining the SEC?
My only question is, why did it take so long for this to come out? If they knew they had wanted to be a member of the SEC, why didn't this take place earlier? Well, maybe they could have done something about it this season. Now you just leave everybody out in the middle of, like, who knows where.
Right.
And that's never a good place. I mean, from being in relationships with people, that is never a good place to be in the unknown. You want to either be in or out.
Right.
And this, to me, would make me feel very uncomfortable if I was in the Big 12,
right,
or if I was Texas or Oklahoma. I think ultimately they will be a member of the SEC because that's what makes the most sense now that it's the cat totally out of the bag,
right,
that they are going to be part of this institution. So the longer it goes on where they remain in the Big 12, the more bad feelings are going to be there. It's kind of like being in a relationship. You don't want to break up with someone and say, yeah, well, we'll stay together till this date.
Right.
It just don't work out that way.
Right, right.
And I think the same thing goes with college football and being in conferences. These conferences are all about money. So if it comes down to the fact that they're going to leave and they weaken the negotiating power for that Big 12, there's going to be a lot of problems.
Exactly. And so as of right now, it said that the Big 12 held a media conference last week, a news conference last week, and had all the commissioners, both Texas and Oklahoma were not on that conference call last week. Now, according to some sources today, that wiggle room now, number one, is still there. There could be a possible payout penalty, and that's in the neighborhood of $75 to $80 million. So it could be a little bit murky if they move forward along with this. Of course, it also is one of the things where the next question that comes from this is, we now know it's a matter of when, not if. And so it looks like they're going to actually make that move. So now as they make that move, what does that mean, do you think, for the league? Let's just say after next year, both Texas and Oklahoma come in. What does that mean for the SEC as they move forward?
Well, I guess like in relationship senses, if she takes her name off of the phone messenger, you do, it pretty much means you're going to break up. So not being on a conference call, that's pretty important. It's kind of like you're not a member of this, the Big 12 anymore. You kind of let us know where you want to be, so you're not needed anymore at these meetings. But for the SEC, this is huge because you have two of the bigger names in college football. Oklahoma and Texas were probably the only two teams out of that conference that could play in the SEC and were worthy of playing in the SEC, where you're not going to bring the conference down by them being in. I thought maybe Missouri was an SEC worthy, but they've won the East twice, so you can't really say that anymore. Texas A&M hasn't won the West, but we wouldn't doubt whether they belong in the SEC. So I think that with Texas and Oklahoma, two of the most storied programs in college football history, this is where they belong. And like we had talked about earlier, more conferences now are going to look to getting the best teams in there so they can kind of present the best resume, whether it's how many playoff teams you get or how much money you get per bowl appearance. All that stuff isn't going to matter.
Exactly. You do a good job of breaking down the numbers. And so let's start here by going by divisions. It looks like if this move were to happen, both Alabama and Auburn will move from the West over to the East, and kind of brought up a good debate right now about how maybe the East could use a little balancing because the West, led by Alabama, has really done a lot of domination.
Well, we're talking since 2012, 89-51.
Right.
The West is against the East in regular season play, and that doesn't even include the 8-1 in the SEC championship games. The only team to win an SEC championship from the East was Georgia in 2017 when they beat Auburn, a year that Alabama won the national championship and beat who? Georgia.
Exactly.
So the West is really dominated, but you take Alabama and those 27 wins and you put them in the East, all of a sudden it's a little more balanced. Same thing with Auburn. I think the interesting thing here is you only have one team in the West that has a losing record against the East, and that's Arkansas.
Right.
And again, it has a lot to do with some of these things that we had talked about, the common opponent in the other division. A stupid thing, because if you're Alabama, you play Tennessee. So Tennessee 0-9 against Alabama since 2012. That's a big thing to do with some of those wins. Then if you're Georgia, you play Auburn. Auburn is 2-7 against Georgia. If you're LSU, you play Florida. LSU 7-2 against Florida. That has a lot to do with whether Florida wins the East or not.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of that goes into play. I think that they need to get rid of that. While it might keep certain rivalries up, I think for the overall good of the conference, they don't need that anymore. You don't need those rivalries. There'll be more rivalries that will develop over time. Who cares if Alabama and Tennessee doesn't play every year? I mean, maybe some people want that. I just don't see how it benefits right now Tennessee at all. And Alabama certainly could use another big win on their schedule rather than just chalking up at, okay, well, we're going to beat Tennessee every year.
Exactly. We'll flip over to the Eastern side of things. And as you said, because of the success out of the West, the East really, Georgia's really the only one that's kind of got the nice mark, however, not being able to get it done post-December.
And Missouri is the only one in that other team to have a winning record against the West, and that's because they've either played, South Carolina, Arkansas, or Mississippi State. So I mean, I think, Texas A&M. So I think the two of them, like if you're playing Arkansas has probably been the worst team in the West, so you should have a winning record against them overall. And I think that's why you could say 7-2 Missouri is in games against the West in those common opponent games. And I think that's why they have 11-11 record overall. They would be 11-9, however, they're 0-2 in the SEC championship game, as you see there. Florida 0-3 in the SEC championship game, 9-14 overall.
Right.
Florida, one of the better teams in the East against the West. That's pretty bad.
Exactly, and you kind of highlighted by last year when Florida had a big loss to Alabama. Game was tight. Alabama spread it out late before going on to go undefeated and win the national championship. Meanwhile, one of the things you touched on earlier is kind of the head-to-head in both the regular season and SEC championship, and you kind of see the disparity between these two divisions, and where maybe a Texas and Oklahoma, them coming in actually probably be a pretty good thing.
Yeah, they're coming into the West, and then Alabama and their 27 wins, and they won 31 games overall consecutive against the East. The last East team to beat them, South Carolina, back in 2010. We're talking total domination. But then again, Alabama's only lost 11 conference games since Saban joined the SEC in 2007. So it's not like they're dominating everybody. Let's just put it that way. But that would make the divisions, I think, a lot more even. You put Alabama and Auburn in the East, all of a sudden the East looks a lot better, and the West are getting two pretty good teams in Texas and Oklahoma. But you still don't know how they're going to match up, because then you got who are they going to play against? Right. Who are you going to put them against? Who's they're going to be common opponent if you continue that stupid thing, or are they just going to play 2 games every year, rotating against the other division, which is what they should do.
Exactly.
And I think that would make everything. There'd be some great matchups there, regular season matchups every year.
Exactly, and also potential postseason matchups as well. You got maybe an Alabama, Oklahoma, Alabama, Texas, and Atlanta for
that would be fun. Just think about that,
That would be huge. Yeah, for a conference championship, they'd be amazing. And then if you add the fact that maybe the conference, the playoff expands as well, it would add even more intrigue to an already intriguing story. We'll have more on that as the developments continue there. Meanwhile, the Atlanta Braves right now are trying to continue a run in the NL East. Coming up next year on Overtime, we will talk the Atlanta Braves pretty early on still after the All-Star break, but a good shot here against their rivals in division. We'll talk about it coming up next.